You don't really need that to understand how to navigate reality because it's all good, especially if you know that you're going to be coming back next time. I don't get fate. Like I chopped off the end of my thumb this summer. Okay. Like it was not that big of a deal. It was physically traumatizing. Like it was a lot of holy shit, but like, okay, carry on. And that would not have been possible during the time that I was focused solely on psychotherapy. Without the spiritual lens and without the belief system work around what's actually real beyond the material plane, and if I truly believe that there's something beyond that, there's another layer of psychotherapy that has to do with belief systems on a cosmological or existential level. That's psychotherapy for the soul. And if you haven't done that work, you're going to keep ricocheting off the ceiling back down to do more emotional work and traumatizing yourself.
Welcome to Limitless, the podcast for cycle breakers, change makers, and conscious leaders who are done performing, proving, and pleasing, and are ready to live, lead, and create from deep alignment. I'm your host, Fiona Walsh. Every 2 weeks, I hold space for real soul-expanding conversations with guests who are still in it. They're navigating their biggest fears, shedding old identities, letting go of patterns that no longer serve them, and rising into their limitless potential. Together, we share what it's really like to be human, messy, raw, imperfect, and learning to own every part of ourselves, even the ones we've tried to keep neatly tucked away. We go deep into the work of coming home to yourself, getting out of your head, feeling safe in your body, letting go of old stories, and creating a life that's true to who you really are. Subscribing to Limitless is the best way to make sure you never miss an episode. So hit pause and tap follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Because this isn't about doing more. It's actually about remembering who you are. And that's what makes you limitless. Welcome to Limitless. Today, I'm joined by Logan. He's truly a multi-dimensional practitioner whose path has been anything but linear. His background spans movement arts and sciences, kinesiology, psychotherapy, and metaphysics. And at one point, he even ran away with the circus. He has shadowed world-renowned psychotherapists, worked with stunt performers from The Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit trilogies, and he's found himself again and again in spaces where performance, pain, healing, and soul all intersect. Now, what I find most compelling about Logan's work is how he honors the body as a gateway to deeper healing. And through his modality, Medicine of Mankind, he supports clients and students to get to the root of chronic emotional and physical conditions by studying what he calls the anatomy and physiology of the soul. His approach moves far beyond symptoms, band-aids, all those things that we do, those short fixes, inviting a return to the wholeness and the full spectrum of integration which happens between body, mind, and soul. And his approach really deeply resonates with my own. As you guys know, through the Inner Freedom Method, I guide clients, their subconscious, which is stored in the body, to release emotional and energetic imprints at the root. And like Logan, I work with the body as the entry point to deeper healing, helping people resolve what's been held beneath the surface and return to a more integrated, embodied sense of self. Now, I first saw Logan at a Conscious Lab event recently here in Vancouver, and he was working live with someone in a demo, which was really cool. And we're going to go into that a little bit later. But a friend a few weeks later also suggested him as a guest for Limitless. And as you guys know, when I get synchronicities like that, I'm like, all right, let's go. So I'm so delighted that Logan, that you're here, that you said yes. So let's jump in.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So we go straight into your story, Logan. So can you take us to that turning point, that pivot point moment in your life where you were like, wow, I can't keep going on like this. Something's got to change.
There's been a few, but the main one is really the start of this whole journey. It happened while I was in high school. I had lived through some very challenging circumstances with an ex-partner, and my stepbrother got sent to prison. my family kind of imploded, and the repercussions of that on my psyche and the trajectory of my life brought me to a point a few years later where I had lost access to all my emotions. The way that my psyche coped with things was to set me on a trajectory of training very hard, to try and offload the physical stress of the situation without getting to the root of the emotions. And I became obsessed, as you know, and part of the intro spoke about my background in sciences and movement arts. At the time, I was training for physique competitions, and I was playing on 2 different volleyball teams, one interprovincially and one citywide. We won championships all over the province, which was great. But training that many hours while doing 3 different sports meant that I was doing about 25 hours a week. And to make that happen, you have to be very robotic. And that was in secret one of the little hooks that my psyche was using to get me away from dealing with the consequences of what happened years previously. So at different intervals during that time in high school, the dam would break and everything would flood out. Maybe once every 6 months or so, there'd be a huge catharsis and a crying and profusely feeling like a whole cacophony of emotions that made no sense would come out because it was backlogged, and then it would snap back into place. So
the protection would go
exactly.
back up.
There was a very strong schism that was happening, and I knew, I was like, this is not normal, and this really needs to be looked at. So when I graduated high school, I sought somebody out who was trained in a methodology that I'd already been studying online. There was a coach in Tampa, Florida, a powerlifting coach who'd actually studied psychotherapy down there under the Bioenergetic Institute. So when I came to Vancouver, looked up a few different practitioners, and I found this old geezer who lived on the island, about 82 at the time. And he seems like he knows, he's a wise elder. Let me try this old man and see what happens. Turns out, this guy's name was Dr. Bennett Shapiro, and Ben was one of the right-hand men to Dr. Alexander Lowen, who created this whole methodology. It was an internationally renowned psychotherapy institute in the US. And this guy happened to be living in Victoria. So I started working with him as a client, and within 6 months, he invited me to shadow his postdoctorate psychotherapy program. So that's kind of the turning point that happened for me. It was this, I'm going to break mentally and physically. And it did happen. I ended up sustaining an injury to both of my shoulders that took me out of sports for 4 years. I couldn't even use my hands properly for about 4 years during that period, which then brought me into filmmaking, which we can talk about that some other time as well. But that's kind of the starting point of what then caused a bit of a pursuit in different directions. The psychotherapy was kind of the prism, and on the other side of that was a bunch of different pursuits in kinesiology, psychotherapy, stunt performing, circus, and they all interrelated back to working on this specific issue.
Mm-hmm. And if we go back to when you were doing lots of sports and you were busy, disassociating, it sounds like, from the reality, were you using the sports as a form of way of coping, or were you using it, because I know some of the people I coach use the word punishment, like they're training so hard that they're punishing themselves. Did that come through at all? Was it?
I would say the punishment component came years later. It wasn't so much a deliberate self-punishment, but I did discover in therapy years later that there's this, if we're talking from like an IFS standpoint, inner family systems, I have a part of me that I call the pharaoh. I'm Egyptian for those of you watching. So the pharaoh likes to whip the slaves into submission and to get the job done. And he's about getting the job done. He doesn't care how you feel. Just do the task, no matter what it takes. And because that was hidden inside of a deliberate, genuine pursuit of I love training, I couldn't discern it. Mm-hmm. Not as a 16-year-old. It took a long time to really notice that there was an unconscious pattern beneath that was enslavement, that was, counter to my actual hell.
Yeah.
Even though it was in pursuit of actual hell.
Mm-hmm. And so he was like a hyper rational, controlling sort of part, I can guess. Did you trace him back to like earlier childhood days? When did he get his job?
He's got a few influences. I would definitely say my mother shares a lot of those attributes. She was adopted. She was a gymnast. She kind of used her body similarly. She has a very similar psychic orientation to like shut up and get the job done.
Yeah.
Yeah. She had to take care of her family. So of course, a lot of the caretaker roles get passed on. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's fascinating. And so you moved to Victoria. How old were you when that happened? Very cool. So even at that stage, you were already like doing studies in multi modalities. They were your first sort of two streams.
And including filmmaking, because the year prior to that, I was in film school.
Okay. I love it. So good. And so what drew you towards kinesiology?
Hard to say for sure. I would say that might track all the way back to the very first origin story, which is when I was 4, I watched Disney's Tarzan in theaters. And that was like a spiritual awakening for me. Something happened when I watched that movie, my whole body lit up and it like changed the trajectory of my life. I was already in gymnastics at that time. So I think I started when I was either 2 or 3 and moved from from gymnastics to martial arts, started teaching martial arts when I was 10 as part of our black belt evaluations. So I've always kind of been in the realms of coaching, body research. And when high school came around, we had electives. Our school had a specialized science program that you could take that allowed you to study university level courses while in high school. So I went the route of kinesiology starting in grade 10 and just made that another thing. You know, some kids take soccer, some kids study music. My thing was obsessing over the body sciences.
Yeah, interesting. So when you were at that stage in your life, did you have a clear view of where you wanted your life to go? Were you one of those kids, or were you just like, this interests me, that's cool, like, and you're following so the nudges?
I'm a Gemini, for those of you who are astrologically oriented. So I can't say for sure. I have a feeling, you know, there's a deep pull towards what feels correct in my life and what's genuinely of interest. And thankfully I had parents who were well off and were willing to encourage me to pursue those things, as opposed to going and getting a job at like Subway, as most kids in high school might do, or Tim Hortons or whatever it was in Canada. They said, listen, you have the time, you have the luxury, study what's important to you. And that meant that I skipped all of that beginner stuff and went straight into, like, my first job was refereeing volleyball, making like 3 times minimum wage at 16, right? So I had that luxury. So I constantly did this with studying music. My uncle was a rock drummer, so I was a percussionist growing up. I went into theater and got a Fringe Festival play put under my name. I was a co-director on that. Did a lot of different things. And they were all secretly in pursuit of the same thing, which then came back around about 10 years later. So to answer your question, no, I didn't fully know, but I did. And that also links back to, in high school, you do these questionnaires at times. You know,
what you're going to be when you grow up?
Every time, teacher. Every time.
Really?
Yeah, and to this day, I still teach. It's one of my main things.
Yeah. It's fascinating. I guess when you do those things, sometimes people try and put you in a box. So they'd be like, you're going to be an elementary school teacher or a high school teacher, Logan? But you're like, teacher's a pretty broad concept.
I wouldn't have thought about that at the time. I was like, I could maybe be a high school teacher, but I like obsessing much more deeply than teaching high school students allows you to really get into. So as much as I love kids and I love that chapter of life that like really transforms you, I'm a little too nitty gritty for that category of education.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And so You've done the film, you're shadowing the psychotherapist, you're studying the kinesiology. Where did you go from there?
Film school was the first year that I came out to BC. I had met Ben at the same time. So I was studying in film school, studying psychotherapy. And in that period, I met my mentor, who you mentioned in the opening from Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit trilogies. She was actually working at my university in the acting department. And she was a stunt choreographer and stuntee from Lord of the Rings named Carrie Teal. I actually interviewed her as one of my term projects. We got to be really close. She invited me to shadow her in the acting program. And eventually I was kind of helping co-direct and do stunt choreography for the acting students on cross-disciplinary shoots where they're working with the visual effects department, the cinematography students, and the acting department to create what's basically a large-scale end-of-term project that involves all the departments. She got me into the circus. She's like, listen, I think you should make a transition into stunts away from directing. And I was like, I'm missing being in my body. My injuries were wrapping up. They were getting better. So I found a job position at the circus that term. And by the end of my first year in film school, I transferred out of film school into kinesiology, got into the circus, and that's what started the next chapter.
Okay, cool. And which circus did you join?
I joined the Vancouver Circus School.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. Do you know the Vancouver Circus School?
Well, they sometimes run like workshops in North Van, like on the pier in summer, and I've been for the kids. So I've taken my kids to them and they absolutely love it. They like set up little practice tight ropes and have juggling stuff, and they're just like really incredible people.
Yeah. At the time they had a location in North Van, which was really convenient. So I used to train and work out of that space. And then I eventually started my own business as a circus coach for a while.
Ah, very cool. Okay, cool. And then where did you go from there? Because I know this just keeps evolving. There's many layers to you. and then.
So to kind of like, I'll try and speed this whole thing up because I know most of you guys are like, wow, this doesn't stop. Circus lasted about 6 years until I graduated university in kinesiology during the pandemic, and then had to retire from circus coaching because there was no performing and there was no coaching at that time.
Oh, yeah.
And that's when I launched my practice that amalgamated all of these different disciplines. So during the pandemic, I started a massage practice to help people who couldn't go to clinics anymore because clinics weren't letting people in. I had a background where I was utilizing massage and kinesiology and psychotherapy already at the circus, treating some of my colleagues because we have to work on each other to keep functional.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've been doing this since I was 15. So at that time, I'm 25. I've been doing it for 10 years. Might as well give this a shot, even if it's temporary. It wasn't temporary. You know, say Great Spirit had other plans for me, and it's now been 5 years, and that seems to be the only trajectory. So launched Medicine of Mankind in 2020 as a massage practice. People were coming to me with issues that could not be dealt with hands-on and repressing symptoms by just shutting things off. So I just started involving the psychotherapeutic approach to getting them off the table, working on the deeper layers of the psyche and going into the unconscious. And then that kind of spiraled into what the practice is now.
Okay, amazing. And then your intuition obviously wraps this whole modality or method that you have. Can you tell me like your experience over time with your intuition, and do you remember it as a child, and did you shut it down, and like tell me about how that's evolved for you over time?
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people have, and particularly women, they have the more mystical description of how to relate to it, given that you're so open, you are a receptacle. The tuning fork of the feminine body is a lot more sensitive. My experience of it with the whole Tarzan background and that aspect of things was a lot more logistical and scientific. Mm-hmm. Though when I was younger, I would have said I can speak to animals, which has been true to this day. That whole Tarzan influence, I think, really unlocked an archetype in me that was already existing. I went the route of performance, but I also thought I was going to go into veterinary work because I can sense the environment no different than I can see into somebody's body when I'm working at a practice. So it started off with like animal conversations. I could speak to my neighbor's cat or the squirrels, and we had like an army of them coming to our house every day. for food, but there was dialogue happening. And that was the first interactions I had with something sub-perceptive. There was a nonverbal communication that seemed to have been going both ways. And I had that with my environment as well. That didn't exist for about 10 years because I got really sciencey.
Mm-hmm.
But psychotherapy has a very similar thing that they use in their practice to infer what's happening inside of a client. They call that transference and countertransference. Transference meaning the empathic quality of the body's tuning fork to pick up what's happening for somebody else. I feel what you're feeling when I'm around you. That would be the transference of your emotion into my body. Well, that sounds awfully like intuition to me. The countertransference is, why do I think I'm feeling this? And why do I think you're trying to make me feel this? Because sometimes the client might be utilizing that empathic quality to manipulate the relationship. And right there's an intersection between analysis and intuition of what you think is happening. So we were exercising that in the practice in a scientific approach, working that muscle without calling it what it was. It took a number of years and opening up to plant medicine work as well to recognize every discipline actually describes the same mechanisms. But if they're using words that are a little more vague, it's harder to really pinpoint what's happening. And the scientific, individualistic, materialistic approach doesn't fully depict it. It's like a half resolution of an image. So I had to start transitioning later into using the word intuition and describing those mechanisms to actually get that muscle to really function properly. But it was always there. So it's a long-winded way of saying, like, it evolves over time. It's always there. And it also takes a certain language to honor it properly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And now when you work with your clients, how do you use your intuition? Because when I saw you at Conscious Lab, I was like, oh, this guy's a kinesiologist. Like, I put you in a box. But then I saw you take in this person's posture and the way they were standing. So that was like your kinesiology. But then from what you said, you were also reading this person's energy, where they were at. So can you explain to me what you're doing when you like look at a client?
Well, there's a few things. Those of you who've known me and know my practice know that I'll categorize the work into 3 different categories: the body, the ego, and the soul, as being 3 distinct dimensions. And the seat of each of those lives inside a very particular dimensions with rules and regulations on a mathematical universal level. The ego, you can't touch with your hands, right? So just from that standpoint, you know that there's going to be a different way to approach pressing buttons in that part of you. So when I'm looking at someone, I'm working on them, there's a few different dimensions I'm looking at. I'm analyzing and I'm assessing the body from observational standpoint. I'm feeling what that sensation would feel like to have my musculature mimic that, which is a very kind of Tarzan quality. I'm using the mimicry of the body to actually become more like them. And if I've got experiences in my past that give me a reference for what that's like, I know what goes into creating someone's posture like that, or even morphed body proportions, right? Maybe something started all the way back in the womb and it caused developmental delays that I can see in their posture. Maybe their hands are like relatively smaller to their body. Maybe their neck is like really tight. And certain things didn't develop the way that it should have. I can infer based off of my intuition and my lived experience what would go into pressurizing someone's body to develop that way. So there's intuition right there, and a mix of analysis as well.
Sense making as well as using intuition.
Yeah. So there's a body level. We get into the higher dimension, looking at the ego, you get into some things more like the clairs. Well, I might start getting a visual of the emotion that's coming up in your body even before you know that you're feeling it. And I can ask you a question about what I'm seeing. And this has happened a number of times with my clients where I'm getting a visual of them in their childhood home reliving something. And it's happening on an energetic level for them. The impulse is passing through, but it hasn't registered for them yet. Maybe they're not sensitive enough. Maybe they're trying to block out the sensation. But my tuning fork is picking it up because the electrical impulse is already in the room. So now I'm getting a visual of it, or maybe I'm feeling the memory, or maybe I'm hearing their parent yelling at them. And then I can speak to it from that standpoint. So there's layers to intuition. It's not just one way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I feel like when people are starting out with this work, quite often they'll have a primary one that they go to. But if you have like feel goosebumps or shivers in your bodies, that's quite often your sentience. But have you been working on developing all of your clairs so that you can take in and hear and feel and see and do all the things and the knowing as well with your clients?
Yeah, I mean, you met me at Dr. Dewey's conference a couple of weeks ago. So I've been studying with her for the last year. I have another mentor who has an educational institute in California called Paul Chek. He runs the Chek Institute. But his higher level education deals with teaching the metaphysics behind the medical conditions that he's helping teach in his actual kinesiology programs. So we are training the four clairs. And if you want to go beyond that, the four clairs are essentially the sensory pathways. Your body has sensory neurons and motor neurons. The sensory neurons are to receive sensation from the environment. The motor neurons are to effect a response, to mobilize something. The soul and the repressed sensory pathways have the same thing. The sensory pathways of the soul are the four clairs, and the motor move ones are the telos: telepathy, telekinesis, teleportation. Now, those deal in a much more woo category because they're very hard to get to. You'd have to separate entirely from the physical dimension for that to function. But there are ancient texts that talk about people who've somehow mastered these things. So,
well, have you listened to Telepathy Tales as well, the podcast? Okay, so there's a podcast which is incredible. I've talked about it quite a few times on Limitless because when I listen to it, it's one of those podcasts where I literally pull the car over at times. And it's the second season has just released. So if people have missed the first, go binge it because the second one you can listen in real time. But it's a filmmaker. She's a documentary filmmaker, but she's made a podcast on meaning and exploring with a lot of them are children and teenagers, though, who have a lot of them have got a nonverbal or non-speakers. So high levels of ASD, and they're all got incredible telepathy skills. And they're speaking to people, communicating to people. They call it on the hill, but in other parts of the world. And it's, if you are open to having your entire mind blown of what could be and what is possible, I really encourage people to go and listen to it. I have got neurodivergency in my immediate family, and not ASD, but I can see with a child with sensory processing disorder, I can see how these clairs are more online, and I can see how, like telepathy, I have so much more belief that it's actually possible, and it's part of some of humans, not everybody, as you said. But I've had my whole reality and mind blown open in terms of what I'm open to becoming more aware of.
Have you ever had people make the connection about neurodivergency, autistic and ADHD type symptoms being the non-linear thinking patterns?
No, the way you just said that before was the first time I'd heard it. But I've spoken to intuitives on this podcast because I feel like this generation of kids are the more conscious. So each generation is more conscious and evolved than the one before. And I'm seeing more kids with more neurodiversity, more intuitive. Like my 3 kids are more intuitive than I am. And I can see as evolution goes, there's definitely, there's, I don't know, consciousness is evolving at a stage with our kids are coming out these gifts that are more developed at birth than ours are. And so and I think also with parents like myself, who are fascinated by this and curious, so that when a child might say, oh, I think this thing happened and da da da, instead of it being shut down like it may have been in the 80s based on fear, I'm like, tell me more. What's going on in your body when you get those ideas? what was that dream really like? And so I think there's this curiosity in some parents now that is going to create this generation of kids who trust their intuition and their psychic gifts from a very young age. And I think it's very exciting to see where they will be when they're 40.
Hopefully in a good place. The way that I conceptualize it, and Paul also talks about this in his education department, is one of the reasons for the development of psychic abilities being much stronger in these generations is because the neurodivergency challenge is coming up because of environmental toxins and a stress load that's so extremely high. The psyche and the survival mechanisms of the body have to externalize its attention to the outside world because it's looking for all these threats that are non-physical, electromagnetic issues, toxicity issues like heavy metals in the brain, environmental pesticides in your system. Your psyche and your body are going to be in search of a problem, which means that in order to find it, you have to branch out the nervous system in every possible direction, kind of like the mycelial network in a forest. Our nervous system functions the same way. So if there are threats in the environment, your body will naturally have a propensity to reach out in every direction to feel everything possible to find the problem. You can see that from the 70s onward, this increase in neurodivergency and all of these negative symptoms. But what it's really saying is that our bodies are shifting towards a desire to understand relational challenges because there's a major relational challenge right now with our planet and ourselves interfacing with it. There are two things that create progress in the universe. There's the vector, the masculine quality, and there's the circle, the feminine quality. That'd be the placenta, the mycelial network. Neither one is productive without the other. The vector bulldozes everything out of its way on its way towards something, and the circle just goes in circles. Together, they create an upward spiral. So having thinking that's purely linear doesn't function in a world that's really diverse, and it also filters out sensations that are environmentally oriented. Only being environmentally oriented means that you're going to be forever stuck in this overwhelm, like autistic children are, being overwhelmed by everything and having meltdowns, but not being able to do anything with everything they're feeling. They can talk to their friends 40 miles away psychically, but they're also overwhelmed in so many other categories that you need to kind of help bring those two together. Neurotypical and neurodivergency are just medicalized terms for saying the two ways that our brain needs to process 3D reality.
Mm. Yeah, well, when the kids in the Telepathy Tales are connecting with their friends on the hill, they're quite often under their duvet booners and they're in completely, so they block out all their senses from the 3D in order to go to that place. So yeah, and it's fascinating because I know that I saw someone recently talk about how ADHD and autism are really disorders of regulation and dysregulation. And if we look at it through that lens, we wouldn't call it a disorder anymore. We just would have come at it from a different level of understanding and how we can help them. And that from a personal experience, that has been how we've really helped one of my children through living in complete fight or flight the entire time for years. The nervous system work was one of the key things that shifted
big time
their reality.
Yeah, one of the common things I notice in my practice is like until people deal with emotional traumas from the past, they will exhibit a lot more neurodivergency traits. Mm-hmm. Now, unconsciously so. They're not deliberately accessing it as a benefit to their life. They're just constantly sensitive because there's something going on that they can't fix. And it happens to be stored in the past and in their body, but they don't know where to look. When you filter those things out, you don't just lose the skill. I think a lot of people believe that like, if you do enough of the work or you help people regulate, that they're somehow going to become neurotypical like that. Like typical is supposed to be the right way of operating. I think that's where there's a major societal and medicine issue.
Yeah.
I don't think they realize that they're necessary. They're both like parts of the same brain pathways that need to function together.
Yeah. Yeah. And neurodiverse people, when they play to their strengths and their superpowers, they're some of the most incredible, creative, innovative, critical thinkers, like intuitive, amazing human beings. So putting them in a box is the last thing that I would encourage with people who have got children or partners who are being diagnosed later on in life, because there's a superpower to having divergence in how your brain works.
I mean, I grew up in Ottawa. I would categorize many people in Ottawa to be maybe medicalized in a different way. If you want to use that whole language, they're so neurotypical that they can't critically think.
Yeah. Huge problem. Especially when most of them are running the government here. Not going to get into politics, but we'll leave that right where it is. I'm interested if I could ask you a question about something that comes up in my coaching containers that I'm fascinated by, and I think that you have some really interesting insights into. So when I take people somatically into their body and we go into their subconscious, and I use a combination of like IF, internal family systems, like you mentioned before, parts work and sensing as well in the body. And quite often when people take me to a sensation in their body, it's where they'll say, oh, my hip, I can feel my hip today, but I've had this injury in my hip forever, so it's probably that. And I always let their body guide. So I'm like, well, we usually go there. And what's interesting, like once we do the work together in that session, it will resolve the tension and sensation that they have there. And then they'll message me 2 days later and they'll be like, I went for a run for the first time in 5 years. And my physio cannot believe what's going on in my hip. Like, what happened? And so I know from what I'm doing when I guide people into the subconscious that we are dissolving or releasing blocks of emotion and energy that's been stored in their body. So how do you interpret that from like a kinesiologist point of view? Well, your whole body of work doesn't need to be necessarily just your kinesiology.
I mean, I can answer with some of the kinesiology background, though it doesn't fully have the language to describe what you're saying.
Yeah.
Any branch in kinesiology that does typically gets into the more biopsychosocial component, which is basically psychotherapy or coaching, right? What I'm hearing and what you're saying happens a lot of the time when you're dealing with the muscular armoring component of the psyche and how it's basically utilizing the body as a means to express its protective mechanism. So the mind has its own coping mechanism and the body has its own coping mechanism. They often mirror each other. That's called character structure, the characterological effect on the body. So when they're going into some state with you and some energy is moving and suddenly, now I'm feeling like my right knee or my hip. Yeah. That could be for a bunch of different reasons. It could be because that emotion is threatening in some way and the body's starting to brace, and that bracing is tugging on that joint or the muscles around it or whatever it is that might be going on in that area. It could also be that bracing is actually literally utilizing the knee as a means of protective mechanism. Maybe it's like trying to kick something away. So it's microscopically prepping for that movement. It could also be that as the energy is moving finally in the body and the emotions releasing, some of the places in the body and the psyche that are lagging behind become more apparent. As the rest of the body becomes functional and healthy, these other places become glaringly obvious in contrast. Because now the respiration has changed. My body up here is starting to move and be functional again. As it increases in function, there's more movement that's going to tug on certain tissues down chain. And if anything's resisting down chain to movement, it'll be obvious. So like those are 3 or 4 different examples right there out of potentially dozens of reasons why that's starting to come up. And it's usually because that joint, that musculature, the fascia, is tied in some way to an association of this memory, this sensation, or this conversation. Mm-hmm. And that's why it's firing off. Now, why is going to be case specific.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. And can you also explain to me when we go into a sensation in someone's body and they take us to a past life? Which I love. Can you explain to me what's going on there?
So again, like this is going to be, it's always case specific.
Yes, I understand.
What I would like to do is I'm just going to answer kind of intuitively here, and then I can loop back and I'll do the analysis component after. Give me a scenario. You're going into a meditative state with someone, and
yeah, okay, I can do me, because this happened. I had with my coach. It happened to me in a session a couple of months ago, where I had the sensation I had was on my chest, and it felt like smothering, like a plate was pushing down on my chest. And she asked, the method you use is you ask questions and then your sort of subconscious is speaking. And so I was saying, I've got pressure. I was saying to her, I physically feel like I'm struggling to breathe. And I said to her, logically, I know I can still breathe, but this memory, I wasn't able to breathe. And she was like, well, what word's coming through? And I was like, smothered. And she was like, okay. And she is psychic. So she was seeing a scene. And then I started to see a scene of a little child like a baby in a cot sort of thing. And then the sensation moved to my back, and it was becoming very uncomfortable in my like physical 3D body. And I said to her, oh, I'm like not smothered anymore. I think I died. And so it was she saw a scene, obviously probably the same one that I saw, because we don't always see everyone's, but she was like, I saw you as a little baby, like, maybe a little bit over 1, and you got smothered and suffocated and you died. And so we were piecing that together, that must have been a past life memory, because I was not smothered as a child, obviously, in this lifetime.
Yeah. So a few things come to mind, and I'll answer from multiple angles, because there are many different listeners and each one's going to find themselves in it differently.
Yeah, and some people don't even believe in past lives. So for those of you, just like
and I'll cover that.
Stay with us.
I'll cover that portion as well. So there is a balance here logically. The sensation you could be experiencing now in any time of day or in a session might actually be a similar sensation to this body's tuning fork to something that happened in a previous life. Now, we're going to assume that you guys believe in this whole past life situation. And that has a lot to do with the soul. So if you believe in the soul is far beyond just the material component of you and your ego, your identity in this lifetime. I'm Logan, you're Fiona. Your body is the container for those two people. But you are so much more than just your body and the I-ness of Logan. I'm made up of this wall behind me. I can't possibly exist in this space, in this conversation, without the chair that's holding me up, the air that I'm breathing, the continent on which I'm sitting on, the societal influences that I grew up in. All of those things, even from the past, are what built me and my identity. Just like the food I ate yesterday built my body, everything around me is an extension of me, and it's coming into me slowly. The air that's over there will eventually end up in my lungs. That's an extension of the frequency of my identity. Different way of saying that is my soul. That can traverse beyond your death in both directions and beyond your birth. All of those things existed before you were born. And the frequency that holds all of this together here and now goes beyond on both sides, before birth and after birth. So if the identity that is contained in this existence can rematerialize later, just like I know the frequency of my body is going to change based off of what's in my environment, we can logically extend that there's a hypothetical like previous life scenario with that. That's a real thing. So just from that standpoint, if I'm living a sensation that larger intelligence has lived before, it's going to send off alarms when it's a really important one. Because I'm actually remembering something that was pre this birth, but the continuity is that the soul never dies. So it's just living in multiple costumes, just like I changed my shirt today and tomorrow I'm going to wear a different shirt. Well, this lifetime I'm wearing the shirt of Logan, and next lifetime I'm wearing the shirt of Sarah.
Yep.
So it's the same person, if you will.
Yeah, the soul doesn't change. Just the zip up suit might look a little bit different.
Exactly. So it knows when it's dealt with something yesterday, a previous life, that is the same thing you're dealing with today.
Yep.
And it's going to create a correlate. That's why you get these little intuitive hits of like, wow, I think this has happened before, but not to me, to a previous version of me. And that's where you have to infer and do a lot of mathematics research to kind of, cross-reference things. Because I think people's personal experience can be great to listen to. But if there's no mechanism that teaches someone like how this actually happens in the universe and why it actually functions that way, people won't fully get on board. So I'll kind of leave that there. I think that's a fleshed out answer.
Yep. I love it. Thank you. One of the things that I'm interested to hear about from you is integration and embodiment, because I think there's so many coaches and self-help podcasts and books, and people do all of the reading and the listening. And these days, lots of people, I'm sure, can come into you and they can tell you their patterns, and they've done a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy, so they can talk about logically and intellectually about all of their patterns, but they're still looping. So what's your view on integration and embodiment from your body of work? Because for me, that's when people go from talking and knowing to actually recalibrating their beliefs and their identities and actually living what they're saying rather than just not being smart about it.
Yeah. I mean, you probably hear me a lot speaking about mechanisms, and I do that for a reason, is that it breaks down the individual components of rehabilitation. There are different mechanisms for different portions of the developmental process of being alive and being a soul. So I'll break this down a little bit differently than I think a lot of people do. Processing, people understand what that might mean, maybe to some degree, but I think they also get confused between what processing and integration is, because they're kind of used interchangeably at times. The way I'll break this down is I'll use sports as an analogy. If I'm going to learn how to spike a volleyball, there are different movements inside of that movement. There's the arm back position as to where my elbow needs to drive to. There's where the elbow directs itself in order to create a line of attack. And then there's the extension component. And there's the follow through with the wrist and the wrist snapping. If I'm going to learn that skill, just like I'm learning how to rehabilitate an emotion or a version of me that's hard to access, like this skill is hard to access, I have to break down the individual components that build up that whole thing. It's like a compound movement. An emotion is a compound movement. It involves typically your whole fucking body.
Yep.
So there's a lot of individual microscopic things that need to be processed individually and then chained together in sequence. And if you can tolerate chaining those things together, then you have a larger capacity to understand and hold that emotion. And then there's the whole component of like how to integrate that learned emotion and skill that's maybe processing something from the past in real time today out in the world. And that would be the integration component. So like I can learn this position, I can learn this one, I can learn this one. I can chain all of them together. Can I actually perform this skill of this emotion on the playing field of life? That would be integration. So when I'm looking at helping people have a functional life, there's a reason why they come to a practice. It's to be in isolation away from all the things that make this way too complex and overwhelming to handle. And we can regress you to the more basic version of understanding the individual steps. Once you've done those enough, just like a muscle will be rehabilitated, your body will remember how to function, and you don't have to ever come back to the therapy practice. The whole point of therapy is to remind your biology of how it's supposed to function, and it will snap back into place. And as long as there's structural and psychic integrity to the work you did, you don't need to come back and do more of it. That's the point of therapy. Does that answer the question?
It does.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Okay. Yeah.
I think though it's like your response sounds unconventional to what a lot of people are used to, because they're used to going to therapy and seeing the same therapist for years and years and years and talking about the same things for years and years and years and years. And unfortunately, part of their identity becomes like, oh, I'm anxious and I'm this and I'm all these things. Whereas you and I know that if you have a view where you are, as you say, processing and integrating, then the integration is when the change is actually sustainable in the body and in the mind and in the life and in who you are. So you don't need to say, I'm this person anymore, because yes, you were in the past, but you don't need to be that person going forward.
And I would say that even extends, because I've lived through this myself, right? There's going into therapy and discovering all the things that you've been avoiding and working on those. But then that also becomes a trap to some degree, where you're constantly going back into the ego to feel its emotions, and you're basically jerking off your emotions. And because the truth is, if you're going to go one step up, where a lot of the spiritual teachings or religious texts go to, is that all of this is okay. You're fine. Nothing bad has happened to you. And if you die, no big deal. We'll carry on. We're going to do this again. Maybe the Judeo-Christian ones diverge from that because they have the whole judgment component and singular lifetime. You only get to do it right once. But if we forget about that for a second, getting stuck in that loop is super easy, because you could say, oh, well, I just need to do more emotional work. And at some point, there will be a ceiling to that, where the actual work is to go, oh, there is no problem ever. I don't need to have an emotional response to this, because I'm going to be okay and I'm going to get through this. Just because I can freak out and I can tolerate losing my mind and I can sob on the floor for 10 hours doesn't mean that that's a normal thing for any animal to be doing, right? There's a reference here, like especially if you look at nature, where you can kind of get a cross section of what is normal for a certain phase and a certain developmental phase. Kids need to cry a lot more, but at some point, you don't really need that to understand how to navigate reality, because it's all good, especially if you know that you're going to be coming back next time. I don't get fade. Like, I chopped off the end of my thumb this summer. Okay. Like, it was not that big of a deal. It was physically traumatizing. Like it was a lot of holy shit. But like, okay, carry on. And that would not have been possible during the time that I was focused solely on psychotherapy. Without the spiritual lens and without the belief system work around what's actually real beyond the material plane, and if I truly believe that there's something beyond that, there's another layer of psychotherapy that has to do with belief systems on a cosmological or existential level. That's psychotherapy for the soul. And if you haven't done that work, you're going to keep ricocheting off the ceiling back down to do more emotional work and traumatizing yourself. And there's another struggle there for people.
Yeah. Yeah, I think also I was talking about this in a recent interview on Limitless, was when people get a bit obsessed with the ego work and they're just like, okay, so that's done. Like, what's next? What am I going to fix next? Or they're like searching for things that's wrong with them rather than just letting it integrate and just be. And my experience has been that like if there's always going to be stuff that you can work on. So if you could just enjoy life for a little bit of time or a long time before the next thing presents, and then you can just like deal with it when it comes up, rather than like diving back into the swimming pool of like what's broken inside of me.
Yeah, I think IFS has a great model, and parts work is a great reference. But I think without having a direct relationship with the cosmos, the universe, God, whatever you call it,
something greater than you, yeah.
And another word that's synonymous with that is love.
Mm-hmm.
Your internal adult, the one that's supposed to be in charge of your internal family, isn't even the best reference for what love is, because it's a portion of your ego. Without having your internal adult, who's at the top of the family, have a reference for what cosmological, universal, or existential love really feels like, and people get there on plant medicines and transcendental experiences, you get a glimpse of what that non-human feeling of love is. That is like both excruciating and exhilarating at the same time. The internal adult that is a piece of your ego cannot possibly love the rest of the family adequately without that reference point. That's where Christians, I think, do get something right, which is we are children of God, and who's at the head of the family is God. Now, I don't call that Jesus necessarily, but I think that concept is important as a reference.
Yeah, it's interesting because I did the somewhat typical path of like being brought up Catholic, and then when I had choice in whether or not I wanted to continue that once I turned 18, and then was like atheist because I was like, you go the other way. And then you come back to like, oh, hang on a second. And I said this to like my grandmother had very strong faith, and she prayed every day, and she'd do the rosary for us before exams or big moments in our life and stuff. And I have this strong sense that just faith for her and faith for me are both two important things. They look and sound a little bit differently, but I was like, there was a time in my life where I didn't want to have any faith. I didn't want to believe in anything like that because I was doing as you do, the flip side. But it's quite interesting to like look at it in my midlife from a different perspective, to be like, oh no, there is, I think we had a belief in something bigger than us, and she put different characters and names and systems and structures around it to what I am, but we still both had strong faith.
Yeah, I think it also takes enough life experience to see the underlying current behind all the actions, that despite how you think things happen in each chapter and why this and why that, you start to build a bigger reference the longer you live of like, oh, there's something greater at play here. And if you spend time contemplating and dissecting it, you can kind of find that most people will attribute similar attributes or nouns to it to try and contextualize it. It's not that they're wrong, but when you put those categories of terms into a bucket, that bucket looks a lot like spirituality.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I agree. Okay, one question before we move into rapid fire. So transformation often happens in small and intentional steps. So micro movements that we start to access deeper levels of consciousness and unlock long-lasting change. Based on your journey, what's one small step our listeners can take today to unlock their limitless potential?
Oh my God. I'm not a simple answer person.
I don't.
God, what? This is going to sound really pandering to a lot of people, but it's more and more true for me. Is find a relationship with God, the universe, the cosmos, whatever you want to start, whatever you call it, and how you want to contextualize it. That thing's going to be a very important teacher. Just like you understand a lot more about yourself by looking at a landscape that's far away and just gazing at mountain ranges, looking at how the planet is built or the cosmos is built, it's going to really put things into perspective. And that's going to be a reference point on how to create a model of pursuit to improve yourself. But if you're only looking at your own 2 feet, you're probably going to come to some very myopic conclusions. And those myopic conclusions are going to be like sparse in their applicability to improving your life. So the wider you go, the more macro, the easier it'll be to understand what the micro should be kind of mimicking.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think as well as I get over it, you realize just how vast the unknown is. And I think I spent a good 35 years thinking I needed to know it all, trying to know it all. And then when you flip it to like, there's so much more that we'll never ever know and we won't be able to make sense of. It's actually quite like, I would call that limitless. Like you just like flipping it over to like, instead of being limited, it's just completely limitless, which is a very cool place to view your life and the world through.
I think it's really freeing too, because it can be easy for people to hear what I just said and go and try and analyze the entire universe. Both are important. Like contemplate it going like, nothing that I'm observing out there, a mountain range and the animals, are worried really about what they're up to. I'll leave that one there. I'm not going to say more than that.
Well, you probably know about more of the animals are up to because you've had little conversations with them, which is very cool. Okay. What's the most uncharted or chaotic thing you've ever done? And would you do it again?
Well, I would say this last year has actually been that exact year for me. Chopping off the end of my thumb was actually the smallest portion of this summer, ironically. So yes, I would 100% do it again. It's changed my life and my relationship to trust in myself and life so much more than 10 years of therapy.
Fascinating. Okay. What's the biggest misconception that people have about you?
Interesting. I think a lot of people either view me as incredibly inconsistent or incredibly consistent. And both of them are wrong. Given that I'm in...
Like very structured and unstructured.
Exactly. Because I've got so many different disciplines and I've done so many different things, they could see that as jumping around. And other people who see the undercurrent of like, I'm always consistently driving towards something, don't see that like, I also jump around. There's a double meaning. There's a paradox to that. And I think
I love
people don't like understand that one.
Well, paradoxes are, our brain does not like paradoxes, but we live in a world of paradoxes. So it's very ironic.
Gemini at your service. I'll give all the paradoxes I can.
I love it. I love it. Okay. What's something you truly believed for years and now you know is complete bullshit?
Well, I mean, you mentioned being an atheist. I'll put that on there. And I laugh, not laughing at people who do operate in that way because I was there for a long time. And it's an important aspect of the research. Being an atheist really does help you understand the material plane really fucking well without muddying the waters. But I would not consider my fingernail to be the full picture of my hand, and nor would my hand be the full picture of my body. And I've learned that lesson.
Okay, cool. When you hear the word limitless, the name of this podcast, what are 3 words or feelings that are evoked for you?
An expansion of body. And actually, I would say even beyond the body. It's an outreaching into the environment. It's a wanting to be part of the world, which is interesting because I know that that's limitless in many ways, even though I'm not going out into space because I can't breathe there. It does feel like I'm building a relationship with everything. I would say it also makes me think of my full potential in pursuing that. So there's the vector, there's the relationship component, and there's the pursuit component. Limitless, like I know I can do more and I want to find that. And this is more of a personal thing. Family and kids come to mind. And I'm not going to bother logicking that one. That just feels like the word limitless for me.
Beautiful. And if you're having a day, Logan, when you're feeling a bit low or your vibe's a bit down, what song do you like to put on to lift your mood?
Oh, that would depend on the day.
Okay.
I love world music and world grooves, so I'll play some African music at times, and other times I'll go back to my roots and death metal, and I'll put some heavy metal on. So it all depends.
Okay, I love it. Well, Logan, thank you so much for coming on Limitless today. We have gone on a journey. I knew we'd have a really interesting conversation and we were not going to follow a path or a plan because that doesn't work for either of us. So thank you for coming and sharing your heart and your soul and all of your wisdom with us. It's been a really fascinating conversation, and I think some really interesting points and insights for people to go and sit with, because there's been some new concepts today that people I know will be like, what was that? So give yourself some time to go and integrate as we talked about, and see where you land on some of the things that we discussed today. So thank you for coming on, Logan.
Fiona, thank you for having me here. If anybody needs to find me too, because you need to process some more questions, I'm sure the links will probably be in the...
Yes, they'll be in the show notes. Yep. Awesome. Thank you, Logan.
Thank you, Fiona.
Thank you for tuning in to Limitless. If you enjoyed today's episode and love hearing the stories of courageous cycle breakers, I'd be grateful if you could leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Your feedback not only helps others discover the show, but it also amplifies our mission to unlock emotional freedom and true potential. Every review makes a difference in helping more people embrace their limitless life.